and I'll create it. Now, it should take a minute to load up. We'll give everyone a chance to do that. So just a reminder here that we are showing a little bit of 3D environment design in Unity here, and it's a follow-up to Declan's workshop on the narrative of computer games. Now let's have a look and see why mine's taking its time. It's doing that funny whirling thing.
This is why you use Windows.
What's that?
This is why you use
No, Windows is the little hourglass that does that, doesn't it, when it gets annoyed with us. Okay, so what we have here in the window in front of us, the main big window pane that you see there is our scene view. This is where we're going to create our design. And once you've created the design in scene view, you can see above that there's a game button and you can go into gameplay mode. At the moment in our scene we can see a couple of things flying around. That thing there. That's our main light, so that provides us with sunlight. And you'll notice I can turn off and on that sunlight there with this button on top of my scene to preview it, okay? But I'll leave that on for now. I also have a camera that shows us around our game. Alright, so the first thing I want us to do is I want to add a terrain to our game so we can play with. So a terrain is our set of ground. So the goal of today would be to set up a terrain, to mold that terrain, so to make it something that's playable. So under the game object menu, if you drill down into the 3D object submenu, you can see under there that there's an option to create a terrain. So if you just click through to that, I'll leave it up on the screen here so you can follow it. We all have a terrain, I hope. I'll just double check here. Oh, there's my one. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to steer around the terrain, okay, easily. So if you look up here where I'm pointing, this is called a toolbar. And see that hand there that's able to grab? So I just want to be able to manipulate and work around the terrain. So when we click on that, you should be able to just grab a hold of your terrain and lift it up. That seem alright? Now the next thing you might want to do is to spin your terrain around. So if you can see on your keyboard in the bottom left hand corner there's an ALT and Alt key. So if you hold that and click, you should be able to spin your terrain around. And if you hold the Control key and click, you should be able to zoom in and out. So I'll just give everyone a chance to get familiar with this area of the toolbar where you click there, and you combine your clicking with Control and with the Alt feature so that you can spin around. Now, if you get lost in your navigation, the good news is over on the left hand side here, you can see there's a window called Hierarchy. So if you double click on the word terrain there again, it'll just refocus back to your original terrain. Okay? So if you get lost and you've lost your terrain somewhere, it makes your life a bit easier. Okay. We're ready to start manipulating and working with our terrain then. The next thing we want to do is make sure in the hierarchy window your terrain is selected. So I'm just pointing at that there for anybody who's not sure. So your terrain is now selected. Now we jump over here to the right hand side to where it says inspector, and I want you to click on that inspector window. So that's up here. So just to remind you of step 1, on the right hand side in the hierarchy view, click terrain. Step 2, we're going to click on the inspector window and make sure that the properties of that terrain are shown. Right, so in my terrain, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this button here where you can raise or lower your terrain. So I've now clicked on the terrain itself, the inspector window, and you've selected the option, the very first option there in this set of tools to raise and lower the terrain. So it says here that you can click on the terrain to raise it. So you should see on the terrain itself. Okay, this is where I'm going to have to do a bit of troubleshooting. So now I'm just using my handle tool to zoom in, and then I go back, and then I should be able to. Now it does say there if I hold down the shift key that it should lower, but my terrain doesn't lower. I'm going to show you how to fix that in a second. So now that you're in. So I'm able to raise the terrain at the moment, but I have a little problem that it gives me instruction here that says hold down the shift key to lower my terrain, but I'm not able to lower my terrain. So I have to change some of the properties of the terrain itself to enable me to do that. So we're going to go in here and under settings, we'll just make sure that the height, oh yes, we have a good height, that's alright. Yeah, and the second one here to paint height. What I'd like us to do under paint height is to click on the button there where it says 150. We're going to type in 100 in there. So you're able to paint to a depth to 100, and then click on the flatten button. It's going to wipe out all the work you've done, and then we're going to zoom right back in on our terrain again. And now, I'll just zoom out a bit. You should be able to hold down the shift key when you're painting your terrain, and it should lower your terrain down. Okay, so I'll just recap on that again. You go to the second option there, which is to paint height. You choose a height of 100, so that means if you flatten to a height of 100, it allows your terrain to have a depth. Then you click on the flatten button, it'll flatten out everything you've done, but now when you hold down the shift key, when you're painting your height, or raising or lowering your terrain, it allows you to paint depth as well as height. So the last tip I want to show you again is in the raised lower terrain here. You'll notice here that I'll just paint some height on. Sorry, I'll just raise my terrain. So I'm just going to show everybody how to do a ridge here on my terrain. You notice that the terrain is quite pointed. So if you go into the paint height, I'm just going to put my mouse here. What I want here is a flat top around that height. So if I point my mouse at the height I want, it should detect. So I'm just going to click in this box here. It should detect the height I want. I'm going to click. That didn't sample my height. Hold on a second. Bear with me a second. So I'm going to flatten my height to be, I'd say 50 meters. And then when I paint height, it should flatten out. It's not working. Sorry, my apologies. I'm just going to go in again. So I'm just going to paint up to a height. Then I'm going to hold down the shift key. Sorry, go to paint height. I'm going to hold down the shift key. I'm going to click on a sample height here. And now it's sampled that particular height there. And now when I paint over this ridge, it's going to paint to that particular height. And I have a flat ridge of that height. I'll just show you that. That's flattened off at the top. So I'll just recap on how to do that. So step one is going to paint the second tool there, which is called paint height. I hold down the shift key, I sample the height that I want to go up to by clicking once, and then I just paint at that height and it'll flatten off in a ridge at that particular height. Okay, so I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to play around with those tools, and once we've got done, we're going to paint some textures. I'm going to. For the next part in here, I'm going to create some textures to go on to my environment. Okay? So it's all about having a topology or a shape to the environment. So that's what topology means, just the raising and the lowering of our terrains. Next thing I want to do is get some textures on this, and I'm going to show us how to paint some dirt and grass onto this. And if we get a chance, we're going to make our own texture, and we're going to add that as well. Okay, we'll see how far we go. So first thing I want you to do for that is we have no assets in the game at the moment, and Unity has some pre-built standard assets that we can import in. So if you go to the assets menu and drill down to import package and go down further to where it says environment. If you click on that button there, we're going to import a pack of environment assets. Might take a minute, so we'll just wait for it to download and decompress. And once we've that package of assets in, we're going to paint them onto our terrain. Now, I'll just click on the import button, we'll follow along with that. Now, the first important thing to realise is when we paint our texture in, and you're going to, the first part of the journey there is click on that paintbrush. Okay? And when we paint across this texture and look and feel, the very first texture we put in is what's called our base texture. So when I put in the first texture, it's going to, the terrain itself is going to be fully taken with that texture. And then you paint textures on top of it. So I'm going to paint just basic dirt on the texture, and then we can paint grass and stone onto that. The textures that we're painting here as well are two-dimensional objects. You will see there are trees and other objects that are more 3D in nature and they can blow about in the breeze. So this is essentially the same as painting onto your wall. It's a 2D feel to what you're painting in a 3D environment.
Same import new asset or import package?
Yeah, under assets, under import package, there's an environment one, so that's the package we put in. Now, how do I know my packages come in? If you look down in the very bottom left-hand corner of my screen, there is standard assets there, and under environment, there's a set of terrain assets, and if you drill down there, surface textures are what we're going to use. So I've just drilled down in that folder at the bottom left. The new standard assets have come in. I've drilled down to the surface textures. What I'm going to do is this sand albino is going to be my base texture, and that's going to paint all over the terrain. Then the grass hill albino is going to paint onto that, and I'm going to try and paint some of the edge of the cliff as well with some texture to give it a look and feel to what I'm doing here. Okay, let's click on the paintbrush and click on the edit textures. Well, just to remind you again, when you're working on a terrain, make sure it's selected here. Make sure you're in the inspector view on the far side of the screen. And then under here, we've clicked on the paintbrush to work on the texture of the terrain. You'll notice here the tool here says a little bit about it. It says paint texture, select the texture below and click to paint. Okay, we don't have any textures yet, so I need to bring in the textures that I've imported. So click on the edit textures button and then click add a texture. Now we should have a little box up here in the top left hand corner, which isn't appearing for me. I'll just try that again. Texture, yes, it's here. Now I'm going to select the texture to put in, and I can see that the one I want as my base texture is called Sand Albedo. That's the one there. So I'm just going to double click on that, and then I'll click on add. It's very important you only select one texture here, because if I add two textures to my palette, it's going to blend them together and it's going to get them mixed up. So I'm just adding textures one at a time. That's very important. So don't get confused here and add two textures at once. It's going to mess up in here. So I just click on the add button, and you'll notice straight away, as I said, because it's my base texture, all of my terrain has been painted with that. Right, so we have one texture applied here. Now we're going to paint some grass on. So if we go through the same process again, make sure on the left hand side your terrain is selected. Make sure your inspector window is showing and that you've selected the paintbrush tool to paint texture. Now, in my list of texture here only has one texture, so we're going to click edit texture, we're going to add a second texture, and when I select that second texture, it's going to be grass, hill, albedo. Make sure it's that one because there's other grass textures out there that are 3D textures and we're not painting them yet. This tool only paints in 2D, don't forget. So just double click there and click add, and you'll notice now that I've selected my base texture. I'm going to move my selection to the grass texture, and then when I paint, it should paint that on for me. If it isn't, there should be no reason why it won't. So we'll give that a go, because our brushes are fine there, so that should be okay. So let's see if we can just paint some grass. Right, so I'll just give you a little challenge here, and I'll show you myself very briefly. So I'm just going to add another texture here for a cliff edge. So I'll just click select, and cliff albedo specular. I'm going to put that in and add that. And you'll notice here, I'm going to paint that onto the edge of my cliff. Hold on, sorry. I'm going to paint this cliff edge here. Then I'm going to tilt around my terrain using my handles. So I'm going to get used to manipulating my terrain. Zoom back in, tilt it around, and then I'm going to go back and paint my texture of my grass. So I'm going to bring down my target strength so it doesn't paint so heavily. And again, you have to manipulate and move around and zoom in and out. Try and get this. So I'm going to go painting again. And again, the target strength is a bit much, so I'll bring that right down. The brush size down a little bit as well. And I'll just paint right on top of that cliff with some grass. I have to bring the target strength back up, I think. There we go. So I have a hill there with some grass going on top of it. Let's see if you can do something like that.